What machine keeps 400,000 people from drowning in their sleep? And what happens when the same machine is the reason they need it? I went looking for the answer in the archives of the New Orleans Sewerage and Water Board, and what I found was not a flood story. It was not a hurricane story. It was the story of a machine designed by a 20-year-old engineer fresh out of Tulane University in 1899, a machine so effective and so efficient that it transformed a crescent-shaped city hugging the bank of the Mississippi River into a metropolis that stretched all the way to the shores of Lake Pontchartrain, a machine that opened up the back swamp for hundreds of thousands of people to build homes and raise families and live their lives, and then, over the next century, slowly and irreversibly sank the ground. Those homes were built on below sea level, turning the neighborhoods it created into bowls that filled with water when the levees broke in 2005 and did not drain for weeks. The machine is the Wood screw pump, named for Albert Baldwin Wood, not made of wood. It is still running today. The original pumps, installed between 1913 and 1915, powered by the same Alice Chalmers and General Electric motors that were built in the early 1900s, are still operational in the pump stations of New Orleans. They have been keeping the city from drowning for more than 110 years. And they are the reason the city needs to be kept from drowning at all. That is the machine this video is about. Not the levees, not the hurricane, the pump. The machine that built the modern city of New Orleans and then, by the physics of what it did to the ground, sank it. New Orleans was settled by the French in 1718 on the only habitable ground available, a narrow strip of elevated land along the banks of the Mississippi River that the locals call the Sliver by the River. The Mississippi, over thousands of years, had deposited coarse sediment along its banks as it flowed to the Gulf of Mexico, building up a natural levee of sand and silt that rose 10 to 15 feet above sea level. That ridge, running along the curves of the river, was the only dry ground in the area. Everything behind it, stretching north toward Lake Pontchartrain, was swamp, cypress swamp, marsh, standing water, saturated organic soil that had been accumulating for millennia, held in place by the water table, spongy and unstable and utterly unsuitable for construction. For the first 180 years of the city's existence, New Orleans occupied that crescent along the river and nothing more. The French Quarter, the Garden District, the Warehouse District, Uptown, all of them sit on the natural levee. All of them are above sea level today. The rest of the city, everything you see on a map between the river and the lake, Lakeview, Gentilly, Broadmoor, Mid-City, New Orleans East, was underwater or swamp until a machine came along and drained it. Before the machine arrived, every rainstorm flooded the city. The streets were unpaved. 80% of them in 1880 were dirt and mud. Stagnant water collected in every low spot. Workers from the Department of Public Works cleaned the gutters and opened drainage canals by shoveling the muck onto the streets, where it sat until the next rain washed it back into the gutters. The canals were open trenches running through the neighborhoods, carrying sewage and storm runoff and garbage and the waste of a city that had no underground pipes, no sewage treatment, and no way to move water uphill in a place where there was no uphill to move it to. The stagnant water bred mosquitoes. The mosquitoes carried yellow fever. Yellow fever killed New Orleans on a schedule that the city accepted the way other cities accepted winter. In 1853, roughly 11,000 people died of yellow fever in the lower Mississippi region, thousands of them in New Orleans. In 1878, yellow fever killed over 4,000 people in the city alone. The epidemic of 1897 killed almost 300, the highest toll since 1878, and it frightened the population into action. The canals that were supposed to drain the city were breeding the disease that was killing it. The water that had nowhere to go was producing the conditions that made New Orleans one of the deadliest cities in the United States. In 1899, the voters of New Orleans approved funds to create the Sewerage and Water Board, a public entity charged with building a modern drainage and sewerage system that would permanently resolve the city's water problem. The first employees were hired that same year. Among them was a 20-year-old mechanical engineer named Albert Baldwin Wood, freshly graduated from Tulane University with a degree in engineering and a job that would define the physical shape of one of the most famous cities in the world. Wood was born in New Orleans in 1879. He grew up in the city, he knew the water, he knew the mosquitoes, he knew what happened to the streets after a hard rain in July. He went to work at the Sewerage and Water Board and began solving problems immediately. His first inventions were practical. Flap gates that allowed water to exit a drainage canal without flowing back in when the pump stopped. Improvements to the existing drainage infrastructure that reduced flooding in the neighborhoods closest to the river. But the fundamental problem remained. New Orleans sat in a bowl. The river was higher than the city on one side. Lake Pontchartrain was higher on the other. The only way to drain the city was to pump the water uphill over the levees and into the lake. The existing pumps were inadequate. They were small, they clogged. They could not move water fast enough to keep up with the serious rainstorm, let alone the sustained accumulation that came from a city with a 60-inch annual rainfall sitting at or below the water table. By 1906, Wood had designed a 6-foot centrifugal pump that was the largest of its kind in the world. It worked, but it was not enough. The back swamp, the vast area of saturated marshland between the settled city and Lake Pontchartrain, needed something dramatically more powerful to drain it. In 1913, at the age of 34, Wood applied for a patent on a 12-foot screw pump, an axial flow drainage pump that used a massive, slow-turning screw impeller to move enormous volumes of water with remarkable efficiency. The pump relied on a vacuum pipe that drew water up through the rotating impeller and discharged it into an outfall canal, where the water then flowed by gravity to Lake Pontchartrain. If you want to check what these machines looked like and how they worked, the Sewerage and Water Board has published historical reports going back to 1899. The patents are in the public record. The pump stations are still standing. Subscribe if you want to see where the next thread leads. At the time of its installation, the wood screw pump was the largest and most powerful drainage pump in the world. Each pump was driven by a 2,000 horsepower synchronous motor built by Alice Chalmers or General Electric. Each one could move roughly 500,000 gallons of water per minute. The city installed scores of them across a network of pump stations connected by 69 miles of underground and open canals. Taken together, the pumps of New Orleans could, in the words of one engineering journalist, suck the Thames dry at London. The combined capacity of the system was over 2 billion gallons in 24 hours. A column of water 1/2 mile long and 10 feet square removed every minute of every hour. The impact was immediate and transformative. For the first time in the city's history, New Orleans could drain its swamps faster than the rain could fill them. The back swamp began to dry out. Land that had been uninhabitable marsh for thousands of years became buildable. Developers moved in, streets were graded, lots were platted, houses went up, neighborhoods appeared where cypress trees had stood in standing water a decade before. Lakeview, Gentilly, Broadmoor, Mid-City, and later in the mid-20th century, New Orleans East. The city's footprint expanded from a narrow crescent along the river to a metropolitan area that stretched 6 miles from the Mississippi to the lake. The population surged, the tax base grew. Richard Campanella, a geographer at Tulane University, has called the municipal drainage system powered by the wood screw pump the single most dramatic transformation of the New Orleans cityscape, and he has said his statement is easily defended. Compare the urban footprint of the city in 1890, a crescent hugging the river, with the footprint by the time the drainage system had its full effect, and the city you see in the second image is twice the size of the first. The pump did that. One machine, designed by one man who never left the city he was born in. Wood acquired 38 patents over his career. Officials from the Netherlands, a country that understood pumps and water management better than anyone on earth, asked him to design drainage systems for their cities. He refused. He would not leave New Orleans. He would not leave Louisiana. He stayed at the Sewerage and Water Board for his entire career, improving the pumps, maintaining the system, expanding the network, and watching the city he had made possible grow outward toward the lake across land that his machines had turned from swamp to solid ground. Except The ground was not solid. That is the center of the story, and it is the detail that connects the wood screw pump to every other machine on this channel. The soil beneath the back swamp neighborhoods of New Orleans is not sand or clay or rock. It is organic muck, decomposed plant matter, peat, saturated root systems and leaf litter, compressed over millennia into a spongy, waterlogged mass that holds its shape and its volume only as long as it remains saturated. The water in the soil is what keeps it inflated. The water table, pressing upward from below, is what keeps the organic material from oxidizing and shrinking. The swamp holds itself up because the water holds the swamp up. When you pump the water out, the soil dries. When the soil dries, the organic matter oxidizes. When the organic matter oxidizes, it decomposes. When it decomposes, it shrinks. The ground surface drops. The elevation falls. The neighborhood that was at sea level when the pump drained it is now below sea level because the pump drained it. The machine that made the neighborhood possible is the machine that is sinking it. Campanella has called this anthropogenic soil subsidence, the sinking of the land by human action, and he has described it with a clarity that I have not been able to improve on. Their intentions were good, he said of the engineers who built the drainage system. And they thought they were solving an old problem. Instead, they created a new and bigger one. More than 50% of the geographic area of New Orleans is now below sea level, not because the river rose, not because the Gulf of Mexico crept inland, because the pumps, doing exactly what they were designed to do, drained the water out of the soil that was holding the city up. The neighborhoods that the pumps created became bowls. The deeper the pumps drained, the deeper the bowls sank. The deeper the bowls sank, the more dependent they became on the pumps. The machine that was supposed to solve the problem became the machine that sustained the problem. If the pumps stop, the city floods. If the pumps keep running, the city keeps sinking. And the pumps keep running. Craig Colton, a geographer at Louisiana State University, has said that the engineers who designed the system were not thinking about the unintended consequences. I don't think the engineers were thinking about the unintended consequences of these things, he said. The consequences were not apparent until decades later, when foundations began to crack and roads began to buckle and gas lines began to twist as the soil beneath entire neighborhoods dried and settled unevenly. The fractured streets and potholes that punctuate New Orleans today, the tilted houses and cracked slabs and buckling sidewalks, are not the result of age or neglect. They are the result of the ground shrinking beneath them because the pump drained the water that was holding it up. And then came Katrina. On August 29, 2005, Hurricane Katrina made landfall east of New Orleans. The storm surge pushed water from the Gulf of Mexico into Lake Borgne and Lake Pontchartrain and up the canals that the drainage system had been using for a century to discharge pumped water into the lake. The outfall canals, the same channels that carried water away from the city, became the channels that carried water back into it. The canal walls, built on soil that had been subsiding for decades, gave way. The levees broke, and the water poured into the bowl-shaped neighborhoods that the pumps had created and that the pumps had sunk below sea level. Approximately 80 to 90% of the flooding in New Orleans during Katrina came from 3 catastrophic failures along the drainage canals, not from the storm surge overtopping the levees, from the canal walls failing, the same canals the wood screw pumps had been feeding for a century. The water filled the bowls. It sat for weeks. It could not drain because the bowls were impounded, sealed by levees on every side. 1,293 people died in Louisiana from Katrina and its aftermath. They drowned in neighborhoods that had been swamp before the pump arrived, that had been drained and developed and settled and lived in for decades, and that had sunk over those decades below the level of the water that was now pouring back in through the walls of the canals that the pumps had been using to keep them dry. The machine that built the city, the machine that sank the city, the machine that was running when the city flooded, the same machine. And here is the detail that holds this entire story together. During Katrina, at pump station number 1, the oldest station in the system, the station where the original wood screw pumps had been installed in 1913 and 1915, the pump operator was a man named Kevin Martin. Martin told the New York Times what happened that night. The 2 new pumps, built in the 1990s, the most powerful units in the station, failed immediately. They went out at the start of the storm, but 4 of the old pumps kept going. They ran all night. And the original 2 wood screw pumps from 1913, the same machines that had been installed when Woodrow Wilson was president, the same motors, the same impellers, the same iron and steel that A. Baldwin Wood had designed when he was 34 years old, those were the most reliable of all. The 2 new pumps went out right away, Martin said. They're the most powerful. They sound like freight trains. 4 of the old ones kept going all night. The original 2 pumps, those are the most reliable. The 1913 pumps ran through Katrina. They had been running for 92 years at that point. They ran while the canal walls failed. They ran while the neighborhoods filled. They ran while 1,293 people died in the water that the pumps could no longer keep out because the canals the pumps fed had become the canals that broke. The pumps did not fail. The system around them did. The levees failed. The canal walls failed. The new pumps failed. The machines that Albert Baldwin Wood had designed in 1913, sitting in a pump station on the same site where they had been installed before the First World War, kept turning. They are still turning today. The wood screw pumps, powered by the same motors from the early 1900s, and maintained by sewerage and water board engineers who have inherited a machine older than anyone alive, are still part of the active drainage infrastructure of New Orleans. They're still moving water. They're still keeping the city from flooding in a summer thunderstorm. They're still doing the job they were built to do. And they are still, by the physics of what they do to the soil, sinking the ground beneath the city they are protecting. A. Baldwin Wood died in 1956. He had spent his entire career at the Sewerage and Water Board. He had watched the city he was born in expand from a crescent along the river to a metropolis that reached the lake. He had designed the machine that made that expansion possible. He had refused to leave, even when the Netherlands, the world's foremost authority on water management, asked for his help. He stayed. He improved the pumps. He maintained the system. He watched the neighborhoods rise on land that his machines had made dry. He did not live to see the neighborhoods sink. He did not live to see the bowls form. He did not live to see Katrina fill those bowls with water from the canals his pumps had been feeding for a century. He died believing, as far as the record shows, that he had solved the problem. The problem had changed shape while he was solving it. The machine was too good. It drained the swamp too well. The city expanded too far onto ground that should have stayed wet. And by the time anyone understood what the drainage had done to the soil, it was too late. The neighborhoods were built. The people were living in them. The pumps could not stop. I started with a question. What machine keeps 400,000 people from drowning in their sleep? The answer is a 12-foot screw pump designed by a 20-year-old engineer from New Orleans who graduated from Tulane in 1899 and went to work for the Sewerage and Water Board and never left. His pumps drained the swamp. The city expanded onto the drained land. The drained land sank below sea level because the water that had been holding it up was gone. The city became dependent on the pumps to stay dry. The pumps kept running. The city kept sinking. And when the levees broke in 2005, the water filled the bowls that the pumps had created, and 1,293 people died in neighborhoods that had been swamp before Baldwin Wood's machine turned them into solid ground that was not, as it turned out, solid at all. The pumps are still running. The original 1913 pumps are still turning in the stations where they were installed. The motors are the same. The impellers are the same. The iron is the same. They ran through Katrina. They will run through the next storm. They will keep the city from flooding in a summer afternoon thunderstorm. And they will keep sinking the ground beneath the city they're keeping dry, because that is what the machine does. And the machine cannot be turned off without drowning the city it was built to save. America wasn't built in boardrooms. It was built in the dark, inside furnaces under 40-ton weights. And sometimes inside a pump station on the bank of a canal in New Orleans, where a machine that has been running for over 100 years keeps 400,000 people dry and sinks the ground beneath their feet at the same time, and nobody can turn it off, and nobody can fix what it has done, and the only option is to keep it running and hope the levees hold. There are more of these stories, more machines, more furnaces, more men who went into the dark and came out different or did not come out at all. Subscribe if you want to see what I pull from the records next. If you want to see how 10,000 men spent 24 years digging through a mountain and 196 of them never came out, that video is on screen now.